Hello, I'm Chris Collins, and welcome to my presentation on what inspired Berlioz to write his Symphonie Fantastique, and to what extent did opium play a part in its composition. I'm sure at least some of you will have heard of Hector Berlioz's repeated use of opium and its involvement in the dreams that he had that led to the composition of his acclaimed work, Symphonie Fantastique. But how true really is that connection? There are various conflicting reports of what really happened, and I aim to explore those and come to my own conclusions. I shall start by exploring the narrative of the work, which is very clear-cut. It's an autobiographical piece and tells the story, at least initially, of his falling in love with Harriet Smithson, an Irish actress whom he first encountered while she was performing as Ophelia in a production of Hamlet at the Odeon Theatre in Paris in September 1827. Initially, Berlioz sought to write her multiple letters and even took up new lodgings so he could be closer to her. After some time though, he upped the ante and penned what would be perhaps his greatest offering to her, the Symphonie Fantastique. Berlioz's obsession with Smithson is mirrored in the music, with his using of an idée fixe, a repeated melodic idea which is present throughout the entire work. The narrative is as follows. The male character, an artist, is infatuated with his beloved, and in the first movement he is introduced as a possibly vulnerable character, though as time goes by there are almost terrifying outbursts in the music. In the second, the artist and his interest are at a ball, almost definitely inspired by Berlioz's own life, with the music painting a picture of his attempts to gain her attention across the room, though ultimately failing and drifting apart. Set in the countryside, likely inspired by Berlioz's childhood, and it features a pastoral duet between two shepherds, culminating in one of the shepherds failing to answer the call, and instead it being replaced by distant thunder, fading to silence. The artist attempts to take his own life in the fourth movement by taking a large dose of opium. However, it fails to kill him, and he is instead cast into a deep, nightmarish sleep. Continuing into the fourth movement, the artist envisages his own execution for the murder of his beloved. Here now is a quote from the original program notes that Berlioz wrote. The artist, knowing beyond all doubt that his love is not returned, poisons himself with opium. The narcotic plunges him into a sleep, accompanied by the most horrible visions. I think that quite well sums up the change in plot at that point. Though in the final movement, the artist is engulfed in another satanic opium-filled dream, in which he witnesses his own funeral, attended by witches and demons before his beloved appears as the principal witch, the melody now a dark parody of the idée fixe. At this point, it becomes more difficult to separate the reality from the story. If this were an autobiographical work, then surely Berlioz must have taken a dose of opium. Opium was well documented at the time as being used for medical purposes, taken as part of a mixture with alcohol. Laudanum, as it was called, was frequently taken for its effectiveness against fevers. Indeed, his father was a reputed physician, and his own opium use for medical purposes is well documented. He even left an incomplete treatise on the subject following his death. However, this doesn't entirely explain whether it had a meaningful influence on Berlioz's writing of the work, so it is wise to explore other influences he may have had. It is difficult to know for certain what inspired Berlioz, though there are some compelling similarities between his work and that of his contemporaries. Chateaubriand's René floats the idea of vague de passion, which is very similar to the musical idée fixe which Berlioz employs. Another area of interest is that Berlioz was inspired by Thomas de Quincey's book, Confessions of an Opium Eater, which looks at explaining the effects the drug has on the human mind from his point of view. But was the drug itself truly creative? Its most famous propagandist, the English writer Thomas de Quincey, maintained that it never actually created anything in itself, but only intensified the perceptions and disinhibited impulses of the human mind. Taking that into consideration, it may have been this work that enabled Berlioz to write with such a focus on the matter, or possible that it merely assisted him in quantifying what he experienced when taking opium himself. It is possible that the book helped Berlioz to get over his own idée fixe and complete the work whilst going in a new direction in terms of the storyline, and also that he might have gained a better understanding of what was going on in his own mind. In Leonard Bernstein's Young Persons Concert from 1969, Berlioz takes a trip. The great conductor explores in depth the intricacies of the music and gives a haunting description of the work. Berlioz tells it like it is. Now there was an honest man. You take a trip, you wind up screaming at your own funeral. In the book by Alicia Kopstein-Henk, Leonard Bernstein at his young people's concerts, the author postulates that Bernstein may have had an ulterior motive with this talk, as at that time in America, and around the world in general, a sharp rise in psychedelic drug use may have meant that he used this book to advocate his own personal view on the situation, as his son was apparently suffering from various substance abuses from a young age, most notably cigarettes when he was 10 years old. In an article by Mike J. entitled Opium in the Symphonie Fantastique, first broadcast as a talk on Radio 3 in 2002, he talks in depth about the influences of opium on Berlioz, citing that De Quincey may have either offered Berlioz an outlet with which to narrate his own mental condition. He suffered from insomnia and experienced frequent night terrors whilst growing up, and this continued into his adult life. He states that De Quincey may have also suggested to Berlioz how opium may work as part of a narrative, allowing him to interlace reality with the dream sequences that he came up with. Finally, he sums up with this: drugs like hashish or opium may produce a state of creatively fertile derangement, but they do not write the script. They may also, as apparently in Berlioz's case, provide a respite from such derangement and offer an emotionally sheltered zone where the essentially sober business of organising, writing or composing could begin. During the course of this process, they may also insinuate themselves into the foreground of the story as an elegant and vivid device for taking the reader or listener on an artist's own strange journey. In conclusion, it is very possible Berlioz had taken opium around the time of writing Symphonie Fantastique, but there is no conclusive evidence. It could be argued that Berlioz took opium in order to free up his own mind and complete the storyline. Though it is evident that he utilised the substance in the era in which he composed the piece, the beginnings of the story are certainly based in reality of his unrequited love concerning Harriet Smithson. It is of my opinion that Berlioz took opium medicinally, but I am unconvinced about its direct influence on the work, and instead personally feel like he primarily drew from the works of his contemporaries and possibly his father's own personal experiences.